Hello and welcome back to Dan's Garage and Farm. We're in the garage today working on the Alice Chalmers G restoration. This will be episode 3. I'm going to work through the Valvetrain on the engine. Yeah, so let's jump right in. So as I brought up in previous videos, I didn't film any of the teardown. I also didn't film any of the honing of the cylinders or the lapping of the valve seats and the valves together. I did want to share a little bit about that. This episode will cover the valve aspect of that. So I looked into valve lapping, wanted to start there. If it needs valve grinding, I could always have that done after I lapped if the lapping didn't work, but taking it somewhere to have the valves lapped is expensive. So let's start with the cheaper option first. I've got a little bit of time, so time to me right now is a little bit cheaper than money, depending on if you talk to me or my wife, I don't know. Anyways, so I watched some videos on YouTube, a lot of Vice Grip Garage videos. I also polished the camshaft, polished the crankshaft. I cleaned the camshaft, polished the crankshaft, and that was done with a video that Vice Grip Garage put on pretty early on in his channel. So I think he was still living in Minnesota at the time. Anyways, for valve lapping, I bought this Permatex valve grinding compound 80037. I don't know if you're seeing, I can't see you. Okay, so this, apply that to the valve and maybe the seat. It's mainly like a pretty coarse polishing compound. You can feel it's real gritty. It's almost like a paste with like sand in it almost. It's pretty coarse, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I guess the idea is the more you grind or the more you lap, the more that abrasive compound breaks down and it gets finer as you go. So similar to starting with like a coarse sandpaper on a piece of wood and then picking up a finer grit sandpaper and then, you know, your final fine grit to give it a nice smooth finish. I guess the valve lapping or grinding compound is designed to break down to go from coarse to fine over the course of you performing the lapping procedure or operation. So I apply that to the valve and to the seat. I then tried to I bought this set of suction cup sticks for valve lapping. You kind of hold it in your hand, both hands, and you twist it back and forth, kind of like a bow drill to create a fire or something. So if you've got new valves, I guess these would work pretty nice. But I'm reusing my valves, and the surface on them isn't what it used to be on this side where the suction cup attaches. So you can kind of see it'll hang on for a little bit. It'll make a liar of me. Anyways, it falls off pretty easily. It didn't take much to pull that off. It's because this surface on the top of the valve isn't smooth, like polished or machined like it used to be, and it creates microscopic air gaps for air to get into your vacuum between the suction cup and the top of the valve face. So was going down, just getting frustrated with that path. So went back to YouTube, found some people that posted about this exact issue, and their solution was grab a 1/4 inch extension. This one's what, like a 6-inch extension, 1/4 inch size. and grab a boot off of a old spark plug cable. This is off of Farmall C. I just had it laying around in the corner. I knew I'm going to replace them, so I was going to throw all this stuff out. I'm glad I didn't. I saved junk in the corner of my garage, and it paid off. Win. So in the cord side of the boot, you put your 1/4 inch extension, and then on the plug side you can insert your valve. Now you have to do this while it's in the engine. Let's see if I can get you to see what I mean here down at the engine. So you stick the valve in, it's home, and then you take this, stick it up underneath the engine through the tappet hole, the lifter hole, and then attach it to the valve. So that whole assembly is attached up inside the engine. And while everything's attached, this end would be attached to a drill. So stick it in the drill, tighten it up, and now the valve is semi-permanently attached in the rubber boot, and now you can rotate the valve just like you would do with your lapping tool, but this actually sticks to the valve, attached to the valve. This also being rubber allows for a little bit of misalignment, kind of like a flexible coupling, and that therefore it's not like a rigid extended tool that would put undue stress or leverage on that valve seat or that valve stem or valve face where it contacts the seat. So that's what I like about this kind of design of this tool. It's cheap. I had it laying around. I had all these parts laying around, pretty much free, and it offered some relief from stresses that could be applied, using a more rigid tool. So I went ahead and lapped all the valves. Now what I want to do is test the effectiveness of my lapping to see if we need to go get the seats ground or machine somewhere at an engine machine shop. So I applied some, it's called Dykem Blue or layout dye, made by Dykem. It's just a blue dye you can apply to metal surfaces, and then you can use a scribe to remove that blue dye, and the shiny metal shows underneath, and it really shows up vividly. Use it in machine shops or fab shops for laying out metal parts where you want to cut them or do some work on them. So I applied it to both the seat and the valve face where it contacts the seat, and now I am going to use this and just rotate it back and forth a bunch of times, and that'll wear off the layout dye between the valve and the seat, and we'll be able to see how good of a job I did with lapping the valve. So you can watch. This is on the #1 exhaust valve. Yeah, it's not wanting to stick. Gotta be really gentle with it for it to stick for a couple twists. Let's see if that did it enough. No, I'm not really seeing any removal yet. I think I'm gonna try and put some oil. Maybe that'll help seal off what we got going on here. oil on the top of that valve to see if that'll help seal it off. Yeah, that helped. That helped a lot, actually. Of course, now the valve's lubricating the surfaces. That's not helping. Okay, take two. I lapped this one actually a little bit more because I didn't really like what I was seeing with the pattern. Maybe it's just my inexperience. This is my first time actually doing this blue dye test. But yeah, I lapped it a little bit more. I really like what I see as far as where I can see the grinding compound working against the valve and on the seat. It leaves like a nice dull finish band that's like probably 3/4 the width of the angle on the valve that's ground into it to seat against the seat. So let's try it again. Yeah, so I can start to see it coming off right across where that band that I saw that was a dull finish after I was done lapping. So yeah, it looks like it's starting to remove that blue dye all across that surface right where I saw that dull surface finish. So I'm happy with that. So yeah, so I've lapped this valve. I've checked the lapping effectiveness, I guess I would say, and I'm happy with it. The contact surface of the valve to the seat, I'm very happy with, actually. Happy to say I do not think I need to get this block of the seats ground, so I'm pretty happy about that. So I have thoroughly sprayed down the seats, the intake and exhaust ports, the guides, and the tappet holes, bores with brake cleaner pretty thoroughly. Doused them down. I'm now gonna clean the surfaces where the cam rides in the block. This block was built or was designed to be an economic option for a farmer. The camshaft where it rides on the block actually doesn't have bearings. It actually just rides on the cast iron block surface. The bore that was machined into it straight out of the cast iron. I've checked the clearance on that. It is suitable to not do anything with it, which is nice, because if you have to do something with it, you really have to weigh the option of finding a different block that doesn't have as much wear, or look into having it line bored and custom bearings made and put in. That can get really expensive really fast, either way you look at it, because who knows with, you know, donor block whether those surfaces are wore out or not. So happy to say that this block is suitable to rebuild from that aspect and from every aspect that I've looked over. So yeah, we're gonna go with that. I'm gonna get some things cleaned up and I'll bring you back when I start assembling. Okay, just was doing some cleanup. I was reading over the service manual. Doesn't give a whole lot of information on the order of assembly of parts with the engine. It's not quite intuitive, so I've been doing some little piecing together, trying to figure out what part's going first to avoid headaches down the road. Pretty sure the lifters or the tappets going next. Just want to go over these. I cleaned these up. I cleaned a lot of the parts up in the Valvetrain with these brass wire brushes. I got them on Amazon for pretty cheap. There's a whole bunch of them in here, but they look like this. I put them in a Dremel tool. Yeah, so the thought here is that the brass brushes don't really do material removal or too much material removal on steel and cast iron parts. Can remove stains, but you're not going to get heavy material removal or the type of material removal you would get with the equivalent style brushes in steel or stainless steel. Like this, I use these a lot to get into tight spaces. I also use my bench grinder with a steel or stainless steel wire wheel in my like 4.5 inch grinder with one, either a cup or a flat braided disc wire wheel. So anyways, clean these up. I cleaned out the opening through here. I believe this is for lubrication. These are more or less 3-piece, I guess they're called tappets officially in the guide. A lot of people call them lifters. I guess I'm not quite sure what the difference is between tappets and lifters, or one is just kind of an old school term and lifters is kind of the new school term. But yeah, it's more or less made up of these 3 pieces. First is the adjustment bolt. This is what actually contacts the valve stem or the top hat for the valve. This is your jam nut. The bolt threads into it, and then the bolt also threads into threads inside of the tappet. I'm not sure how good you can see that, but adjusting the distance between the jam nut and adjusting the distance between the bolt head and the tappet will change your valve lash. That's how you adjust your valve lash, bring it into spec. And then the jam nut, it does what it says. It jams everything into place so it can't come unscrewed, and it stays put during operation. So I've cleaned all these up. I've looked at a bunch of different things in the service manual. Like I said, I couldn't really find a good order of operations for reassembly. I watched some videos on the Farmall Cub, which also uses a Continental engine with a flathead or L-head design, very similar, I believe, to this engine family. So that gave me a lot of advice on how to remove valves and install them. So yeah, I'm gonna put the tappets in first. I'm gonna lube them up, put them in the bores, and we'll come back. Okay, got all the tappets in except for this one. I am using the Lucas Oil High Performance Assembly Lube. It's a semi-synthetic, it says, and eliminates dry starts. That's what the purpose of assembly lube is, to get a nice thick oil on all these surfaces to prevent dry start. Dry start in a freshly rebuilt engine is gonna result in a lot of words that I really don't want to use in this channel, because I want this to be a family-friendly channel. So yeah, last tappet I'm gonna throw in here. I did thread the adjustment bolt all the way down into the tappet. I didn't tighten anything. I want to leave as much room as I can once these are in the engine for me to install the valve springs and the hardware, the top hats, the roto caps or whatever they call them, so I can get my big fingers in there and have as much room as I can with these all the way retracted, and then we can set valve lash when we need to. So I'll bring you over to the engine. I don't know how good you can see down in there, but this is going in the last bore at the, what is this? This is the traditional front of the engine, which would be rear facing. So this is the, per the manual, this is the crank side of the engine. This is the flywheel side of the engine. Traditionally the rear of the engine. I mentioned in the intro video about this engine having some brazing or a bronze piece added around the starter boss. I don't know how good you can see it with the lighting, but it starts from about here, and it's not through thickness, it's just on this surface here. Like they lost some thickness in the casting, and they restored that thickness with some brazing, but it goes from here to about here. Like I said, I don't know if you can see that. This is raw cast iron, like it was cast correctly, and then right here where this chamfer starts, there's a lot of brazing from here all the way over to right about in here. So yeah, the tappets are in, and I believe the next step would be to lube up the bores in the block. Like I said, these are bearingless bores, it's just cast iron. So I'm going to lube those up, and then we'll be ready to clean up the camshaft and install it. Okay, got the camshaft all cleaned up. I did use the brass wire wheels on the Dremel tool to clean the camshaft. I really wanted to be sensitive around the lobes. The lobes are still pretty stained, but after the brass wire wheel treatment and brake parts cleaner and whatnot, I'm confident that I got this thing as clean as it needs to be. Anything that wears off now is going to be, I believe, pretty microscopic and going to go in the oil and either cleaned up in the filter or come out in the first oil change. There wasn't heavy rust or scale at all on this camshaft. It's in really nice shape. I've verified all of the passages are free and clean and clear. There's, I think, 2 main oil passages on the cam. There's one right here on the end, this end face. I believe that feeds oil to the thrust plate when it's in the engine, and through to this bearing, or I would say, yeah, bearing surface, and then a much larger one that I guess feeds the governor assembly through this bore, or maybe the oil comes through the governor assembly into the bore, and that communicates with this hole that goes through the entire camshaft all the way through. I verify with my flashlight that everything's open. I've got them as clean as I can get them with brake cleaner and some metal wire. So I'm pretty happy this is pretty clean. I think it's ready for assembly, so I'm gonna throw some lube on it and get it in there. Now I will re-lube or lube the actual lobes at another time. I think right before I'm ready to really seal up the engine, just because I think it would make it a big mess for assembly right now to lube up all the lobes. Maybe once I get it in there I can lube them up too real quick. Alright, here it goes. All the lifters are in. Bearing surfaces in the block are clean and lubed up with the assembly lube. And the camshaft is in. I'm going to get my hands cleaned up and get things ready to install the thrust plate next. Hi, welcome back. I've got everything I need to install the thrust plate on the camshaft to permanently have the camshaft in the engine from now on. I did want to say that if you get on the Facebook group for the Ellis-Chalmers G, I think it's like Ellis-Chalmers G's 1949 to 1955 or something is the name of the group. The manuals on there there's a tab for documents or manuals or something, but all these are free on that site, so you can go there, find the manuals, find the parts catalog, do yourself a favor and get all those printed out. But the service manual says to torque these to 15 to 20 foot-pounds. Of course, my brand new torque wrench I bought because I broke my old Craftsman 1/2-inch drive torque wrench. I bought a Husky, and the lowest it goes down to is 30 foot-pounds, so I'm using my Harbor Freight like 1/4-inch drive, which 15 foot-pounds is like 180 inch-pounds, which is what the Harbor Freight 1/4-inch drive is in. So I'm going to grab this thrust plate and throw it on. Get that assembly lube on these gloves, and it's, you know, it's not quite the level of mess that NIC's is. I'm not a tin man, but it's hard to get off these gloves with shop towels. Makes everything slippery. I just put some blue Loctite. It's a medium strength Loctite on these. I don't want them backing out. There's not that much torque on them, so I'm going to do myself a favor I hopefully won't regret. The blue Loctite is medium strength. Sorry if you hear that wind noise. That's my furnace in my garage. It's really not too cold outside tonight, but you probably heard it in other videos. Can you see? Can you see what's going on? Why don't I bring you in for a close-up? Oh yeah, there you go. Here's some clickage. No clicking yet. There it is. There it is. The spec in the service manual is 15 to 20 foot-pounds. So I'm going to split the difference between 15 and 20, go to 17 and a half, which will be 200 inch-pounds, I believe. And yeah, that'll be a nice happy medium. It didn't take much to get there. Yep. It did spin a little bit before I hit that torque. But so the thrust plate's in, camshaft is in, the lifters are in. So that's going to be it for tonight. It's about 10:30. I got to get to work tomorrow morning, and yeah, I got a little delayed by having to hold my 6-week-old while my wife showered, but I'm glad I made it back out here to at least get this far. We'll pick up with you again tomorrow. Okay, it's a couple days later, and I'm back out in the garage, and I'm ready to put the cam timing gear on. I've got everything cleaned up, so I'll get you set up so you can see. Okay, the Woodruff key is already on the camshaft. The camshaft has quite a bit of in and out play, but I think that is because the oil pump maybe captures it on the backside, and the timing gear captures it on this side. So I think it's supposed to be able to float a little bit right now. Yeah, so get this on. Yeah, and that's really gonna, this is really gonna capture it. Washer on. Grab the nut. I'm gonna grab the torque wrench, grab the torque value, and bring it back. Okay, don't quite know what the torque spec is on this nut for the camshaft timing gear. I ended up sticking this bolt in one of the drill and tap holes that you use to put a puller on to get this off of the camshaft. That worked nice to stick a pry bar in. I just torqued it to 30 pounds for now. I'm hoping one of you knows the proper torque for that. The manual, couldn't find anything about it. I looked all through the camshaft and the crankshaft sections for assembly. It talks about the thrust plate bolts bolt torque, but it does not talk about this. So yeah, I got it to 30 pounds for now. Really don't know what it's supposed to be, so if one of you knows, let me know. I think if not, I'll probably get it up near maybe 50. Maybe I'll pull it back off and put some Loctite on too. Really don't want it coming off. So yeah, if you know, let me know. Actually, I didn't use a pry bar. I remember I went in for lunch after I torqued it, and I'm just now coming back out. I threaded this bolt in until it came in contact with the casting, and then I backed it out just barely to give it any clearance. And then as I started to apply torque, the camshaft turned until this bolt, the back of this bolt inside or behind the pulley, came in contact with the thrust plate, and I thought that was a good way to a good material or good piece of material, a good mechanical way to prevent rotation while I torqued it. So yeah, that's how I put it on. The only piece of information I'm missing is the torque. So yeah, I'm gonna, I think yeah, before I put the spider weights on for the governor, I'm gonna do a lot of other stuff. So I think it's time to flip this over and put valves on. So stick with me. Okay, so here we are doing the last two valves, the number 4 intake and exhaust. We're at the back of the engine, which is the front of the engine when it's on the tractor. I went through that, but so you know, each cylinder has got an intake and exhaust, but on this engine, and I think a lot of engines do this, the intake ports are shared between two cylinders, and each cylinder has its own exhaust port. So you want to have more room for your expanded exhaust gases to escape than you want for your dense incoming cool air. So this intake port is shared by these two intake valves. This exhaust valve has its own exhaust port. This exhaust valve has its own exhaust port similar to this one and this one, and these two intake ports or intake valves share this intake port. Another easy way, this is where I started actually, is to look at your manifold. So you got your manifold here, and if you hold it up, your carburetor bolts here. So all of your incoming gases go in here. So that's intake. So if you trace, and you can stick a flashlight in here, and it's hard to see, you probably can't see it on camera, but it will reflect enough so that you can see it on the intake ports. So yeah, there's 2 intake ports and 4 exhaust ports. You can pretty easily, you should be able to see it, put the flashlight in the exhaust, the final collected exhaust port that goes to the muffler, and see the reflected light through these 2 ports. So yeah, just maybe a helpful tip for some of you who got this all torn apart like me and had to really, take a step back and think about it. So yeah, so to compress these springs, or to insert the springs, the manual says to, if you look at the spring, they're not symmetric. They're not just like kind of cut to length. I guess I'll call it top side. It has 3 coils that are pretty close to each other, and then the rest of the coils are pretty equally spaced. This is I'll call it the top of the spring. The manual says to put it pointed at the block, which I was confused on that terminology. I was really looking at it, and I guess what I came up with is the block. This sits against the block casting. This side sits against your top hat, or I'll call it bottom hat here, because it's kind of upside down. So yeah, I'm gonna do the exhaust valve that's over here in the corner, just because I got to use the valve compression tool for the exhaust valves. I don't use it for let me stick you over here. I don't use it for the intake valves, because the valve cover studs that hold the valve cover on with nuts get in the way of my tool, and the intake ports are surrounding the intake valves are surrounding these studs. My tool is too wide to lift up on the spring in the top hat before it hits the stud. I tried to double nut this and remove the stud. It ain't coming out. I was getting really concerned I was going to strip these studs, or the threads on the studs, and then have to really figure out what's going on here. I probably have to, if I was lucky, I could just chase them and restore some of the thread, or have to cut these off, figure out how deep it went, and get into drilling and tapping the block. I just thought to myself, let's just try and not use the tool I had. And the intake valve assembly is a lot easier than the exhaust port valve assembly. So don't know if you can see up top here are those 3 tight coils. Down here is the rather equally spaced coils on the spring. To get the ears of my tool, it'd be kind of nice if this was maybe beveled, the shoulders beveled down, so I could use the tool to wedge itself under the top hat of the valve retainer, but it's not. So I also had to exchange the ears themselves off. These, you can see, have this rise in it. The original that came on the tool are straight, and I did not have enough stroke in the tool to compress anything. The valve was not compressed at all by the time this hadn't even contacted the valve. So I exchanged the ears out, which was nice that they came with the tool. So first you want to tighten this up a little ways. These are really small valves and hats, so everything's kind of compressed. So first, I get the screwdriver in and lift. Oh shoot, I don't have the valve in yet. Hang on. Getting ahead of myself. The exhaust valves have this tapered section and shoulder for the half moon keepers, half moon, crescent moon shaped keepers, I'll call them. When you lap valves, you really want to keep track of where they go. On this tape, I permanent markered the number that cylinder these valves came out of, and then the intake and the exhaust valves are different shapes, so that's how you know which one goes where. Final clean step, I take some acetone on a rag, clean all that glue tape glue off, clean the seat one more good time. See a lot of people use brake cleaner like it's free. Acetone isn't free either, but you gotta think buying a bulk tank gallon of acetone is cheaper than buying an equivalent gallon in aerosol cans of brake clean. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, tell me. So I put some assembly lube on the valve. Probably am using too much, but I'd rather use too much than not enough. Slowly rides through the valve guide. Now I'm going to clean off my hands a little bit. So now we have valve in, spring in, and top hat. Now we're ready to use the tool. So I'll stick my screwdriver in here, lift it up, wedge up the spring, and this is all to get the ears of my tool under the top hat. Here we go. So I have that in. Now the first thing you want to do is put the you want to get the top hat sitting on your ears flat. You can kind of adjust how wide your ears are at this point so that it doesn't flop off as easily. So now you'll stick. So when I do this first step, putting the, what's it called, the roto valve cap on, it's this little hat that the valve sits in, the end of the valve sits in, and this is what contacts the tappet adjustment screw, or the valve lash adjustment screw, I guess you'd say. It's only for the exhaust ports that they use this, or the exhaust valves they use this design. So I'll set my tool up kind of loose, and I'll show you why here in a moment. I want to be able to lift up on the whole assembly and the valve to follow the whole assembly to fit the roto cap in between the adjustment screw, the top of the adjustment screw, and the bottom of the valve. And you'll see, well, I hope you can see what I mean here, because even with the valve compressed, or the spring compressed, there's not enough room to get the roto cap, the roto valve, whatever you want to call this thing, in between the bottom of the valve and the top of the adjustment screw for the tappet. So what I do is I lift up on this to give myself some room, and the valve, this is what happens with these little parts. They fly all over. So I tip it down a little bit to give myself some clearance, and I lift up on the whole assembly again, and it already moved. Let's see, I got this too tight. Okay, that should work. Crazy kids incoming, I think. Okay, there. Almost. There, I got it.
It's time to eat dinner.
You heard the boss.
You got a lot in.
Alright, these are not the easiest thing to get in. This is where I'll back off on the tension on the valve spring compression tool to bring the top hat down a little bit. It's a little crooked. That will decrease the amount of space, vertical space, that the retainers have to sneak out of the groove they have to fit in. Found that helpful. So what I do is I grab one with my long magnetic needle nose pliers, get it turn the right way, and then come up underneath my valve spring compression tool, and then take a long pick and just try to guide it in place. Just gotta guide it. Oh, there, it's in. Now, the trick is to try and get it up inside the top hat like that, and then kind of put some pressure on it. So there's like barely enough room inside of that top hat for these retainers to fit. And depending on how the spring compression tool is pressing on that top hat, it'll shift the top hat one way or the other around the valve stem. So you kind of gotta shimmy, get the first half on. You want to rotate it back to the back side of the valve of the top hat, bottom hat, so you can fit the other retainer in, the other half but sometimes, you know, they just get kind of stuck. And when they're not stuck, they tend to just pop out. I got it back around. Now I'll grab the second one and final one for this engine. Get the rag lint off of it. And try to get it in there now. Get it close, the needle nose. Yep. And then now's when you need to shimmy it back. Oop. It's so close. It's holding it back. I need to create some space by lifting the valve or the spring up a little more. Yeah, that's what's wrong. Oop. There we go. It's seated. Now we can violently release valve spring compression and hope everything stayed put. Now, kind of need to do the reverse of what we did earlier to get the ears back around. Okay, so the intake valves are just retained by this simple little pin, and then spring pressure on the top hat keeps that pin from coming out. So I'll get everything started here. Trick I discovered with these, you want to try and keep the hole for the pin to go through pointed out at you the whole time. You want to pry up on the top hat with your screwdriver. I don't know if this is going to work because it's kind of turned. Take your needle nose and grab your pin. Try and feed it through. Getting your home. Too good for your home? Ah, there it is. And it is seated in there. All right. The valves are all installed. And welcome back. We're going to adjust the valve lash on the last valve. It is an exhaust valve for cylinder 2. So I'll throw you up on the tripod and I'll show you some tips and tricks for that. Actually, it is the intake valve for cylinder number 1. It also looks like, oh, that's because it's lifted. Okay, so we're going to make sure it's at, I like to do them right after the lifter comes down. I'm sure it's all the way seated down. So I bought the flat, the thin tappet wrenches. They're quite a bit thinner. I did have to grind the 7/8 one down and the 3/4 wrench down, and that was to get back to the exhaust lifters, tappets back here, to get enough clearance to get the wrench in, and also for the 3/4 to give it enough available room to rotate the lock nut far enough that I could reach the next flat once I ran into the side of the casting of the block. Then I could reposition and actually get back far enough to reach another flat. Okay, so that's the info on the wrenches. So I'm just going to make sure. Yep, that one's already done, so I didn't want to do that. I want to make sure the lock nut is loose in the lifter, but not too many threads out of being tight, not too many turns out of being tight. It just makes it more difficult when you get further on down the road. I need to find my other wrench. Here it is. I've got my feeler gauge to set the lash, a 9/16 wrench, which is the size of the adjustment screw. And you really, like, you get these wrenches on and you really feel like it's loose enough just to stick your fingers in there, or put a pick on the hex and turn it, by hand, or with an easier tool that's faster than this. But it's not. You get your finger in there and you can't turn that thing. You put any side load on it and it just freezes up. So pretty much are stuck using wrenches, which just takes a long time. You get there eventually. My grandpa used to ask why everybody was in such a big darn hurry all the time. My other grandpa on my dad's side, telling my dad, you gotta have the right tool for the job. So, two good pieces of information when you're doing this kind of stuff. So, looks like I got a little too tight. This is 12th thou, so I gotta loosen it. Yeah, I think that's right there. Okay, so that's the last valve. They're all set, and this episode has definitely gotten too long. Still learning how to do all this talking and trying to keep it brief, but also informative. Keep you interested and engaged, but not boring. So I'll work on it next time. Next time we're going to get into installing the pistons and the crankshaft, and we'll go from there. We'll see how far we get. Thanks for joining me. Love to see you come back again. We'll see you.